Previously, we've looked at how web servers and web browsers work. We talked a little bit about our tags and how they're going to be important and how we're going to create tags. Let's look at building our very first HTML page. So I'm going to come up here. I've already in my project folder in Visual Studio Code. I'm going to select New File. It's going to be a text file. Select a language. Choose HTML. And now I'm ready to go. I'm going to go ahead and start with the very first tag, and this needs to be at the top of every HTML document that you write. And you notice that as I create the open tag, it gives you a list of my tags. Well, the first one that you see is the one that we need to put in here, and that's doctype. Doctype, all caps, starts with an exclamation point. This lets the browser know, hey, did you notice that it was HTML encoded? If not, hey, I'm giving you another hint. Guess what I want you to display it as? Well, it does another thing on top of it. It lets us know what version of HTML we're using. So when we say doctype space HTML, this is actually the doctype for HTML5. Now, previous versions of HTML had really, really long doctypes, because they'd be like doctype HTML version 4, here's the DTD, here's the this, here's the that, and it gave us all this extra information that we really needed to know because there were versions and subversions and how the browser would display things depending upon what version you were using. But with HTML5, remember, it's a living specification. It's constantly being updated. One of the things they said is, you know what? If you just say HTML, we know it's HTML5. It's whatever version your browser has. We're going to keep it as simple and as accurate as we can with that. So they really, really simplified the doctype, which was nice. Go to a new line. Once again, this is more for organizational standpoint. We're going to have a new tag. Notice that the doctype isn't coming up now. Okay, Visual Studio Code goes, you only need this once, you've already got it, I ain't going to show it to you again. There is an HTML tag, and you can just write it as HTML, or I like to use the attribute lang equals and then en. Now you might go, what does that do? Well, it lets the browser know, hey, the default language for this page is en. En is a 2-letter shortcode for the English language. So the language code is based upon the native language and how it's referenced. So for example, DE is short for Deutsch instead of GE, which you might think of as being German. Okay, so we can put in a wide number of things: French, Spanish, etc. What gets picked gives the browser a hint as to how to display it. That way, if it needs to use a different font set or other things like that. This is actually an optional attribute. You don't have to put it in there, but it's a good little hint. After that, I'm going to put a closing angle bracket, and then I'm going to put closing HTML. Notice I just put the closing HTML and a slash, and as soon as I put that /, which is how we know it's a closing tag, Visual Studio Code said, oh, I know what to do with this. You mean to close this tag out. It wrote the rest of the tag for me and put it in line with where my HTML is indented. So you notice I did not indent my HTML tag. Well, if you notice, my doctype doesn't have a closing tag, just an opening tag. Not all tags have a closing tag. Most do, not all. And so I didn't feel like I needed to indent HTML. So this is technically a web page. You might go, well, it's not much of one, and you are correct. Okay, 100% correct. But this is technically a web page. We've defined our doctype. Let's know that we're using HTML5. We have our HTML tag. We're technically good. Let's put some content in it. But to put content, we need 2 more sets of tags. Now, one is technically optional, but realistically you need it. Okay, so this is going to be the next one, and I go inside my 2 tags. This is going to be my head tag. Now you'll see that there's lots of other head tags or head-like tags in the future. Bear with me. This is the head tag. The head tag is up above the web page content that you're going to display. That means you're not going to see anything we put inside the head inside the web page. Very important to keep track of. However, the head tag, much like your head, is responsible for displaying a lot of how the body is displayed and works. And we're going to put in things like links to external files for CSS and other types of style sheets. We're going to put in metadata and a variety of other things like that. So let's just work on getting this head tag in here. And so I have an open and a closing tag. Now, what's going to go in here? Well, I'm going to go in between those two tags and hit the enter key. And the most common thing we'll see is a title. And notice as I start to type, it starts to narrow down or limit what my possible tags are. I can highlight one by using my up and down arrows and then hit the tab key, and it finishes writing it out for me. You notice that Visual Studio Code a lot of times does not put the closing angle bracket, so if you want to use attributes, you can go ahead and start to typing your attributes. No attributes for the title tag that I'm going to use. The title is what shows not on the web page, but in your tab on the browser window. I'm going to write my template, and then I have a closing tag. So this is just real simple, and what am I doing? I'm creating a template that I can then use for the rest of my projects. This way I don't have to go through this whole process. Not that it takes that long, but it's a nice little time saver. If you can save yourself 30 seconds, that's great. Okay, so I've got my title that displays now. All right, so the next thing I might do is add some meta tags. Meta tags are providing information about our data or our other pieces of information. You might think, well, what types of things would I need to tell about? Well, one is, how is my data encoded? This is especially important if I'm using a language in my web page that is not able to be displayed in the ANSI character set. The ANSI character set does a great job for displaying English types of letters, but there's a lot of letters and a lot of other languages that are not included. And so I'd have to use a different type of character encoding, and I would need to let the browser know, hey, here's how this is going to work. So to do it, I'm going to create a meta tag. And for character set encoding, I'm going to use an attribute, char set, and I'm going to use UTF-8. This is the most common, especially if you're able to use the ANSI character set. If you are using English, this is typically what you would use. UTF-10 would be more important, or one of the other UTF versions, if you're doing something that is not an English or a Latin-based character set. Now, meta tags are very flexible because most of the time when you have a meta tag, you have two attributes. The char set one is kind of unique, but I can say name, and then I get to specify, hey, what is it going to be? Okay, and this lets me define how do I want to use this. Real important for a lot of intranet type of things, where I might need to specify who's the employee that created this, or is this for a certain department? And then on my internal web server, I might use that information when I'm trying to display who can see this document, who can't, and a variety of other things. I'm just going to use author, and then typically with my name, I have where's my value going to go, and the content attribute. And I can do something like that. Very, very simple, very easy to work with. Okay. Most of my meta tags use that name and content. And so I can define a lot of different values in there. Some of them are just helpful pieces of information. Some of them are more usable depending upon your content management system or things like that. None of them are required for a web page. In fact, even the char set isn't. The char set will be assumed to be UTF-8 if you don't define it, but that might be okay for you. We're just going to give you some ideas of what you might see. Now, inside your head, you also might find things like a link tag, And link tags are useful for displaying things like linking out to your CSS document or linking to your favicon. Your favicon is that little icon that displays instead of just a generic HTML icon. Each web page can have its own different icon. Well, that's how you display it. We'll talk about that in the future. You could also put in what's known as script tags. A script tag allows you to embed JavaScript into your web page to allow your page to become interactive. This has a lot of really cool uses, but the question is, should it go inside of your head tag? And it depends. Originally, JavaScript was known as a blocking call. That meant that it had to download, be parsed, and run, and then you could continue to download the rest of the document. Now there are ways to kind of get around that because so many web pages have lots of JavaScript enabled on it. Whether or not that's your case or not, who knows? JavaScript can also go down in the next set of tags we're going to look at and is often recommended for performance reasons. So let's look at what that next set would be, and it's going to go after my head. So I'm going to put my mouse cursor after head, hit the enter key just so I have a new blank line, and I'm going to do my body tag. Now, your body tag is actually what is going to be seen. That's right. That's where we see our content. That's where we see our information. So if I want my information to be seen, I put in my body tag. Now, if you remember from earlier modules, I mentioned that about 98% of all web pages had errors. And so our browsers had to learn how to work around it. You will find that even if you mess up your head or body, your web browser will attempt to make it work. Now, I put attempt in air quotes because sometimes it does a better job than others. What does that mean? Well, if you don't follow these guidelines, who knows what you're really going to get. So I highly recommend you follow the guidelines. Do what you need to make sure you get it right. Use the body appropriately. Body is for displaying all our content. And this is where we're going to spend the vast majority of the rest of this course is in how do I put different types of content into the body? How do I make it display? How do I organize and group it and those types of things? Now, notice that my head and my body are both indented the same amount. This is because they're on the same level. They're not inside of one another. Okay? Body is not inside of head. Head's not inside of body. They're both inside of the HTML tags, and so they're indented like this. Now, I could save this, and I'm going to save this as template.htm. And like I said, this is a complete web page. Inside Visual Studio Code, I don't have a way to view this, so I need to go into a browser. So here is a browser as an example. At that point, I'll go into my folder where my files are located that I've been working on. If I drag template into my browser, or I can go into my browser and say file open, you're going to notice I have a very blank looking document. This is not a mistake. This is actually correct. We've not put any content inside of our web page. So let's look at how we're going to put some basic content into our web page. Now, a lot of times I will create this template file, even for my own self. I like to create these and then I'm going to open it and go File, Save As, and then give myself a new file name. This just saves myself that 35-45 seconds it takes to build it out. I'm going to call this first.htm since it's my first page and change my title. My first page. This is only going to be what shows up in a little tab on your browser. It's no big deal. Inside my body is where I'm going to put my content it's going to display. This is what's going to display on the actual browser, that main section you can see. So I'm going to create what's known as a heading tag. Remember I said there's a lot of tags that have kind of similar types of names. We have head. Well, now we're going to have a heading. And we actually have 6 heading tags. So I'm going to use H1. H1 is the biggest. And it's the biggest, it's the boldest, it's going to be really out there. Think about if you had an English class and you were doing an outline. Okay? Remember your big, bold points, those things that you really want to make, your Roman numeral 1, if you would. Well, this would be like your H1 tags. Okay? everything that's going to be underneath it needs to point back to it. So I have here H1, and I'm going to put in my first page. Okay, there we go, my first page. Hit the enter key. Your H1 tag is a block level content tag. I'll put in a paragraph tag. Notice it's just P. Just like heading 1 is H1 and paragraph is P, you'll notice that computer scientists are great for abbreviations. We don't like to do any extra work that we can avoid. So abbreviations help us in a couple ways. Number one, it's less content that has to be sent. And if you think about it, paragraphs are going to be the most commonly used tag. It's going to be everywhere. So if I had to write out paragraph, my page would get larger. This helps keep my content size smaller, makes it faster to send, even when zipped. Secondly, it's a lot less likely for you to misspell a single letter. Misspelling P is a whole lot harder than misspelling paragraph. I don't know about you, but I've got fat fingers that don't seem to ever type the right keys that I want them to type. I'm always having to retype things, go back. This simplifies it. Okay, so in my paragraph, you can put in quotes, you can put in double quotes. If you're used to programming in different web pages, you might go, oh, how am I going to include? You can just write it. Because we're using tags, we don't have to worry about encoding things unless you get to angle brackets. And we'll talk about that in the future. Now, if I come here and save this, I can go back to my browser window. So here I'm in Chrome. Now this is template.html. I'm going to change this to be first, which was the file that I did the save as. And you'll notice that it has the 2 lines of code that I wrote. My first page, nice and big. This is my very first web page. That's my paragraph. That's smaller. These are default styles. You can change them. You can use a different font. You can change their color. You can change the background color. You can change their positioning. There's a lot of things that we can change about that. We're going to see that in future modules. This just kind of gives you a little bit of heads up. Now you might think, well, that's great. You had small amount of text. What happens if you have bigger amounts of text? Let's show you real quick. I'm going to go to accesstolearn.com and go to my lorem ipsum generator. So lorem ipsum is kind of some dummy text that's become famous. It's actually out of a book. I have actually created a completely randomized set of information. So I'm going to create for myself a couple of paragraphs. I'm going to use the HTML tags just so we can kind of see that. I'm not going to have any headings, but I just want to see some text here. This allows me to come in here like this and copy and paste it in. So if you need to have some just generic information for a web page for a class, this is a great way to do it. Now you will notice that because we copy and paste it in, you'll notice 2 things. Number 1, line 11 here, it keeps on going. This is because I have word wrap turned on. So if you go to view, you'll notice I have word wrap down near the bottom. It's got a little check mark. This means that if it wasn't there, I can also do Alt-Z. Notice that if I turn word wrap off, and like I said, Alt-Z will toggle between those, it sends the text way, way off to the side, makes it really hard to edit. So I like to have it word wrapped. It's still one line. These spaces is just visualization, okay? You'll notice that it's not indented the way you might like. You can choose to format document, and if you format it, it formats it according to how it does it internally. Now, Visual Studio Code, notice that it moved my head and body to be left justified. So it took out one level of indent. Does that matter? No, not really. And you can see it formatted all this other stuff. Sometimes it will put in line breaks. Those are easy enough to take out if you need to. Now, you might be thinking, okay, well, what is this text that's here, this lorem ipsum text? Well, it's Latin. The English language is based off of Greek and Latin, and so it creates something that looks like English. It's not. You're not going to spend your time reading and going, oh, I don't like what it says. It lets you kind of see, what does this look like? So if I save this, go back to my page and reload it, you'll now see how it lays out and how it goes ahead, and the browser smart to go, oh, I'm at the end of my line. Let's go ahead and word wrap, and it automatically puts it in. And if I resize this, you'll notice that it automatically adjusts my text. This is stuff that happens for you automatically. This is just new paragraphs. Now remember I said also that we had new headings. So I'm going to just show you real quick what that would look like. I have H1, this is my heading 1. H2, heading 2. I'll do heading 3 as well. I'll save it and reload. And you can see your heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. You'll notice your headings create some extra spacing between other elements. And as my headings get larger in size, my headings, the text gets smaller. Okay? This goes all the way up to heading 6. Typically, you do not need to go beyond heading 1 or heading 2. Heading 3 is sometimes used. Heading 4, 5, and 6 are very rarely used. The exception to that is every once in a while I've seen like a whole book be posted online. Heading 1 will be, for example, like the chapter titles. Heading 2 will be the subchapter headings. Heading 3 will be subsections. You might go, well, wait a second. How often do you have subsections? And that's where you use like a heading 4 or 5. Very, very rarely. So, like I said, most of the time we're only using headings 1 through 3, but you do have 4, 5, and 6 if you want to. 4, 5, and 6 get smaller with each one. You notice the heading 3 is almost the same size as your regular text. You will notice that your headings are bolded, but even that is changeable by our styles when we look at that. So this just gives you a real simple way of how do I build my first page and how do I start to put my organizational content. Remember I said web pages are designed, and the original intention was to share scientific papers, and so this was all they really needed. Now, we have dramatically improved upon HTML, and you're going to see how we can have a lot more different types of tags and how we can style things and make things look a lot better. And those types of features will all be going into future modules, as you'll see.